Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 95, A Paper Moon. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the movie Kubo and the Two Strings. How you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing pretty well. I just got a crown put over a root canal yesterday. So
Gosh.
the aching of teeth seems to be over, so I seem to be good. So that's nice.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. And I'm recovering from that laryngitis that took my voice. That was interesting.
Yeah,
Very
that's good to
interesting
hear.
experience to not talk.
Yeah. Sometimes you just have to rest it too.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was doing, just allowing the vocal cords to recover. But it was like I said, very interesting experience. But the voice is back, and that means that we can talk stories. What's
Excellent.
new in
I'm
your
glad
writing
you're feeling
world?
better.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad you're feeling better after your root
Thank
canal.
you.
So what's new in your writing world?
New in my writing world. Let's see. I received notes back from my editor on my second Zara book, which is good. I've been waiting for that for a while, so I am going to be able to go through those. Lots of edits. She does copy editing, line editing kind of edits. So there's a lot of
Nice.
little stuff I got to go through, and then I'm going to be moving next week, so I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to get to that anytime soon. I'm in the middle of packing and prepping, and utilities set up and shut down and all that kind of stuff. Once I get moved, that'll be the first thing I get to dive back into.
Nice.
What
Very
about
nice.
you and your writing?
I have been working on developing a comprehensive global sort of writing Bible, world Bible for my Adventures of the Empyrean Guard series, because I wanted to make sure I'm not missing anything, because I have had to take a break on the writing of it, and the brain isn't what it used to be anymore, and poof, stuff just doesn't stay in there anymore. So I need something that's a good resource. So I've been working on that. That's been an intense experience, but a good one, because it's really immersing me back into the world, which is really good. So I'm excited because I see the path to writing and finishing this series, and I'm really looking forward to that, because I like this series. I like where I see it going and how I see it going, and so I'm really excited to get that on paper and get it out there.
Excellent.
So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, or television?
Let's see. I was watching season 2 of the Apple TV Plus sci-fi show called Silo,
Oh, yeah, okay.
which is a cool follow-on from the first season. I don't know if you've seen it. It's sort of a post-apocalyptic world where these people live in a huge underground silo, and it's about their in inner conflicts, between, not inner, but like conflicts between the different people who have different tasks, and the people above and the people below, of course, this kind of thing. But it's pretty cool. And yeah, I think the last episode maybe of the season is out. I'm not sure how many episodes there are going to be, but yeah, that's been fun.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that's about it. What have you been watching or reading?
Well, I'm finishing up the last book in the Fablehaven series, and I'm glad that I heeded my offspring's urgings to continue reading the series, because there has been some really enjoyable stuff, and some of it feels a little contrived or convenient as far as available MacGuffins or plot twists, etc. But
Yeah.
keeping in mind that it is for a younger audience, I don't think it's that bad. So I've been enjoying it, and I'm glad I continued to read it. So I'll be finishing up that 5th book here probably the next week or so. And we also did our annual watching of Everything Everywhere All at Once that we have turned into a tradition of watching that on New Year's Eve, which is, again, very enjoyable. Looked at it
Yeah.
from a different perspective this time. And still, there's just so much in it, so many layers. And then been not science fiction or fantasy related, but we started watching the very short series called Man on the Inside with Ted Danson.
Oh, I just watched that first episode like an hour ago.
Okay, what did you think?
I'm intrigued. I want to keep watching.
Yeah, we've been watching it. It's such a very low key, very mild, mellow, sweet storyline so far. I think we've finished episode 4, so we just have episode 5 and 6 to watch.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but it's been interesting, and because of that, I'm interested in watching. There's another series by the same writer, I believe, called The Good Place. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, you haven't seen The Good Place? You definitely have to watch that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll probably watch that next.
Yeah, The Good Place is great.
Yeah. Which this time of year is what I really like to do. I like to watch just sort of low key, pleasant comfort watching this time.
Yeah,
of year.
it seems exactly like that. Like low stakes, like a cozy kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Are you ready to talk about Kubo and the Two Strings?
Yeah, let's do it.
Today we're talking about the story told in the movie Kubo and the Two Strings, and I will read the very short summary that's available on IMDb. A young boy named Kubo must locate a magical suit of armor worn by his late father in order to defeat a vengeful spirit from the past. Did you like this movie?
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, this was a bit like my experience with Lady Hawk, where I had fond memories of seeing it when it came out, but it didn't hold up that well for me on a rewatch. I think overall I do like it. I think it did some things very well. I really like the way that it starts and they set up the story by sort of having the character telling a story. So it feels kind of like a fairy tale or folklore story that's being told to us, which I thought was really neat. And then the story becomes the tale that the character is telling. He's telling the story, and you find out that that story is actually about him and his family and what's going on. So I really like the way that they set that up, and I like how they set up what I call the distressed state of the character's world, Kubo's world, which is, it's about his mother, right? She's increasingly depressed, and she's apparently losing her grip on reality, and Kubo's struggling to deal with this and figure out how to handle this moving forward as things get worse. So I like the setup for it, and then I like how we learn some of the story early on through the story that Kubo is telling, and then we see that is coming from his mother. Some of it obviously, and it's like he can't finish the story because he doesn't know the end of the story yet, which is kind of cool. And then we see how it relates to them and connects with their lives. So yeah, I like how they set everything up. And then I like how, he gets pushed into his new world of the story, right? He stays out too late and gets attacked like his mother warned him. And he's thrown into the new world of the adventure ahead. Thought that was set up well. And then there's a lot of fun things that happen over the course of his adventure. Some interesting creative elements. But I think for me, the biggest thing this movie has going for it is its style, is the feel of it, which they set up, early on, and they carried that through very well. I think there's something really nice at the heart of the story, which it's all about the characters, of course, like most good stories are. And I think they do a good job in setting that up, and we get to see it play out toward the end. But I'll definitely have more to say when we discuss aspects that I think could be improved. But I want to know, what did you think? Did you like it? And what aspects did you like?
I had not seen it before, so this was my first time seeing it. And I enjoyed it for the most part, but I also found some things that I wish were a little different, which we can talk about in detail later. I also thought that they set it up really well. I thought the opening was wonderfully intense and yet simple. The simple but compelling was the way the opening felt to me. You have this person who's lost in the ocean. You want this person to survive, so immediately you're rooting for them, right? It's the conflict is the person versus the elements.
Yeah.
And then you don't realize that they're also she's a woman trying to save her child. So that adds to the layers of, rooting for them and you want them to succeed, etc. And then I agree. I thought that the setting up of, the world, Kubo's world, and the problems with the world was beautifully done. Also, you start rooting for Kubo because you see the problems that he has in this world, and yet he is striving to live happily with these problems and adapting to them and working with them. And I thought that was, you just develop such a respect for this kid in such a beautiful way. I really, really liked it. I thought that was nice. The words I wrote down while I was watching it was sadness and whimsy.
Yeah.
And I thought they were beautifully woven together. Like you said, the storytelling that he did was such a clever way to introduce the backstory. And what I really enjoyed was that as the story progressed, as the movie progressed, and you got to see, Kubo going through his own story and his own quest, this whole concept that the storytelling itself was essentially a superpower that would save the day. And I love that. And then also how, this is what you want to see in any character arc, that the character uses their strengths. It just was very sort of right up front here with this, that every single time the character was using their strengths and going with their strengths. And, he was trying to, find new tools and find armor, etc., and the things to help him defeat his grandfather, the moon god. But still, it was his storytelling that made the difference. Yeah, I thought overall, it was an enjoyable watch. I did not get up and walk away or get bored,
yeah,
which is always a good sign. But there were some things that, we can talk about is that I might wanted to have changed as a writer. So are you ready to move on to what you might have changed as a writer?
Yeah, sure. We can move.
Okay. What do you think? What you have changed as a writer in this story?
For me, a lot of this might stem from the fact that this is kind of inspired by Japanese folklore, fairy tales. I'm guessing, I didn't look into the history of this movie, but that's kind of what it feels like. And I was left with a lot of just questions about why things were the way that they were, like the choices that were made. Again, it may be because it comes from some other fairy tales, but a lot of it just didn't make sense to me. I'll get to those in a bit. For one of the things, though, that I noticed in this watch through was we get a big chunk of this movie where Kubo's tracking down the pieces of the samurai gear, right? Which ends up not really playing much of a role in the climax of the movie. He gets it, and it's not that it's useless. I mean, it does defend against him, but it's not the thing that's necessary. So it felt a little bit like this kind of dead-end quest in a way. And I'm generally not a fan of that kind of storytelling. Maybe that's just me personally. It just feels like I wasted a lot of time and investment along with this character doing something that didn't really amount to much.
It's like Wizard of Oz. She went on the quest to get the broom for the witch, but she always had the power to get home with the shoes on her feet. It was just like, what?
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit of that. I don't mind it too much because it was entertaining, and there is, of course, character development going on, character relationship development that's happening. It does play some part at the end, if not much. And I guess we see that, it is kind of that you had it in you all along kind of thing. So it's not horrible, but it did feel a little like too much time maybe had been spent on it, right? Like a good half of the movie is spent on tracking down these pieces of gear. So that was one thing. On one of those specific elements, I didn't understand the helmet of that armor was in the village where he grew up. Like, how and why? That seemed odd. It seemed like a writing contrivance just to get Kubo to go back there, but it didn't make any sense to me. Why
Yeah.
wouldn't his mother have known about the helmet being there? I mean, she was like, the armor is this thing that you got to get. And she didn't see that. Had she never been to this town? Why were they located there? It just seemed too convenient. I kind of liked that it was there. It was like the bell or part of the bell or something like that. If it had been explained a little bit better, that there was a reason why that was there, and it was to someday inspire him or something like that. But it just seemed like a writing trick. I thought the challenge of getting the sword was kind of underdeveloped. Like, why are all these swords stuck into this giant skeleton? What was that thing? Like, why was it there? Why was it with this animated entity? And the trick was just to try every sword? That seemed like, I don't know, I would have wanted something that required a little bit more thought. It made me think, imagine if Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, when he's facing all the chalices, he just had to try all of them until one worked. That's what it felt like, right? How disappointing that would have been. That's kind of how this felt to me. It's like, oh, you just keep going until you got the right one. So that wasn't particularly satisfying of a challenge for me. Maybe because I'd already seen the movie, it seemed too obvious that Beetle Guy was going to be his father. They built him up so much in the beginning of the story, his father, that he wasn't there, that he didn't show up as a spirit. So you're already thinking, okay, maybe he's not dead. And then they keep referring to him throughout the story. And here's the only other guy in the story. So I wonder who this person could be. So yeah, that felt a little bit obvious to me, the way they set it up. I think if there had been one or two other male characters who they came across and interacted with, who could have possibly filled that role, it would have been a little less obvious. Not a huge thing. I think the way that they kind of rekindled the relationship was kind of cool. Another question I had is, why was Kubo's mom a monkey? Like, her sisters weren't monkeys. Like, what connection did that monkey as that particular animal have to do with her as one of the daughters of the Moon King? Again, that's probably something from folklore that I didn't get, but in the context of the story, that just seemed random. It didn't really make sense. And that to me is just one example of the problem I had with the world building for this story. It seemed like they took bits and pieces of other things and threw them together without trying to explain any of it. Because by the end, I was like, why is this? Why is this? Why is this? Like, why did Kubo have to be blind? I mean, his mother wasn't blind, nor were her sisters. So why does Kubo have to be blind to be with the father? Like, that didn't make any sense to me. Again, it wasn't really explained. And then Kubo's mom being a monkey, why was she like a totally different person as a monkey? It literally wasn't like the same personality at all. We saw some of her when she was like telling the story, and she was all excited and happy and animated, and then she basically becomes like this mean person now when she's a monkey. So there's things like that felt very inconsistent. I didn't understand like the motivations of the Moon King. Did he really want Kubo to be with him? Or did he want the eye for some other reason? I didn't really get that. It's like he was willing to kill even Kubo, apparently. You don't want to be with me? I'm going to kill you. It's like, why? That seems really weird. Like, was he afraid Kubo was going to use power and corrupt mankind? It didn't seem like he really cared about mankind. Just a lot of stuff that I didn't really understand. Again, maybe folklore explains more of this stuff and they didn't put it in the story. I don't know. I don't understand how his magic of animating paper turned the godly Moon King into a human at the end. Like, I didn't see a connection between how his magic worked and what it did at the end. There's a lot of things like that I just didn't understand. I'm not even sure how to fix these things other than just improve the world building, or if the world building is there and I just don't get it, make some of it more clear to me as the viewer who doesn't have familiarity with any of the source material. So there's more, but that's the basic gist of my comments.
I actually had the exact same kinds of comments. What happened to the Moon King is something I wrote here. It didn't make sense. To add to what you said, because I agree 100% with what you said, the world building was so beautifully done at the beginning, and then just sort of fell apart in the middle, and then completely disintegrated at the end. I also felt that the story lost its pacing when we started the quest, especially when we found Beetle Guy. all of a sudden, up to that point, it had been Kubo's positive outlook that provide the sort of the humor in the story.
Yeah.
As sort of the comic relief kind of thing. It was Kubo creating the comic relief. And then all of a sudden, it was Beetle Guy doing the comic relief. And Kubo was just he seemed almost purposeless after that, in a way. He had taken the lead at the beginning of the story. He was the one that would go down to the village. He was the one that would get the money to feed his mom and take care of his mom. And then, he was I like to use the word that you use that I really like, agentive. He was really agentive until Beetle Guy showed up. And then all of a sudden, he was sort of pushed into the background a little bit.
Well, that's an interesting note.
Seemed kind of, it sort of lost its pacing then after that. And it was almost like things were happening to him rather than him pushing the story along. So that was something that I felt. But I agree 100%. There were so many unanswered questions. What happened to the sisters?
Right.
Were they killed?
Yeah,
if they weren't killed, why didn't they come back and help the moon god? I mean, it was just like things that just didn't seem to make sense. And I would have liked to have just had those threads tied up a little bit more to help the story feel a little bit more satisfying. I also would have liked to have seen, it was a beautiful moment at the end where the moon god, however, by whatever means that wasn't clear, became a human who had lost his memory, much in the same way that Kubo's mom was losing her memory. He had lost his memory. And so I loved how the village essentially was giving him new memories. You're a kind person. You're a generous person. You're a thoughtful person. You're a loving person. I would have loved to have seen them take just one more step and made him then be loving, kind, and thoughtful to Kubo to sort of step into the parent role for the parents that he lost. That would have been so satisfying. Instead of having Kubo then praying to the lamps, which are the spirits of his parents, saying, "Thank you for letting me get to know you, but I still need you." And that's almost the last line of the story. I still need you. Yeah. And so he still has a need that's not been met by the end of the story.
Yeah.
It's left me wanting.
Yes.
And it was disappointing.
The same. Yeah. I was unsatisfied with that as well. Not that I necessarily need a happy ending, but I wanted more, resolution or something. Because
yes,
both of his parents are dead when he really just kind of got to meet them for the first time. And it's like, that's super unsatisfying.
Yeah. So how about themes? Did you find any themes in Kubo and the Two Strings?
Yeah, so this is interesting and this is one of the areas where, to me, it kind of fell apart a bit as I started thinking about it. Because I'm not sure what transformation Kubo goes through, if any. He had to accept the loss of his parents, maybe, to realize they were still with him all along and who he was. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, if I look at the final, like the climactic action, right, of that sort of moment where it all comes together and he has to make a tough decision to defeat the antagonist. The message seems to be, you don't need your parents. You just need their residual magic. Ultimately, that's what he did. He's like, man, I could just use this magic I got from them and put their strings together and cast a spell, and now I defeat the moon god. So I don't know. But I prefer to choose a theme which you pointed out, which I think is probably more accurately the theme of the story, not reflected necessarily in his choice there, but in what he does, which is sort of weave his own story. So I think it's about not underestimating the power of story, and maybe ultimately the power of a story is more powerful than any weapon, because he went through all this time trying to get, this armor and this sword and all this stuff. But ultimately, what won the day was his storytelling ability. So that's the theme that I'm going with.
Yeah. I had something about relying on your strengths, relying on your gifts, because that's what Kubo did, is rely on his gifts. He had the gifts of the magic that came with his storytelling and his two-string playing. I also agree with you that part of the theme on this that I think is a little bit stronger and a more powerful theme is the power of perspective and the interpretation of what that story is. Because one of the things that he talked about was that he had the memories of his parents and the good memories of his parents and the happy memories of the parents. And so he was going to make his story a happy story. He's going to have his perspective be to focus on the value of those memories and the story that he told. And so I think that theme of take the story and make it a happy story, shape your perspective so that the way you see the world is a positive one, is a good theme. And I like that. I appreciated that.
Oh yeah, I like that too. That makes me think though, like there's a lot of characters not being consistent or changing from who they were, right? Like the mother is a certain character at the start, and then as Monkey, it's like she's a totally different character. And then the father, as Hanzo was his name, I think. Hanzo is like, I guess we learn about him mostly through story, but we kind of trust that because it comes from the mother of who he was, and then we see him as the Beetle, and it's like a totally different character. And then even at the end when we see him again, it's like, oh, that seems like the more original Hanzo. And then we've got the Moon King, who again becomes a totally different character. It's not even the same person, basically, at the end of the story, which is really weird. I wonder if that's something in their mythology, or if that's just
that's a good question
of this storytelling. But anyway, I like the theme that you came up with.
Thank you. So what do you take away from Kubo and the Two Strings as a writer?
I think for me, I really like the ideas in this story, and the way that they were headed with the characters at the start of the story I thought was interesting, and I really like the style of it. But from a writing perspective, it reminds me to make sure to spend time on world building and making sure that things make sense to the consumer of your story within the story itself without having to be aware of something else. So that's my takeaway.
I have very similar takeaway in that it's a little bit drilled down more than, yours was a more global, make sure your world building is done well, which I think is that is the point here in this story, that world building just hadn't happened or wasn't made available to us as the consumer of the story. I drilled down a little bit and said, make my villains more three-dimensional, because that was really part of the problem. The sisters and the moon god or moon king or whoever were so two-dimensional. They were just bad. And we didn't understand why. We didn't understand what their motivations were. We didn't understand what their end goal was. None of that. So, which all goes to the world building, as you pointed out. And then also, I love this idea of using the storytelling to save the day. I think there's something really cool about that. There's something very sort of meta or breaking the fourth wall kind of thing. I think it's just really neat. So, and I've been kind of pondering how I could use that in my own storytelling. Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in Kubo and the Two Strings. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in the movie Edge of Tomorrow. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.